It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha, it's Feedback Friday. And yes, less hair. Finally managed to get a haircut, which means boss fight recording can resume. Hey, go me. If you want more details on this, patrons get regular, much longer updates. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Okay, I only have time this Feedback Friday to focus on the comments from one video. And I'm focusing on the one where I asked a specific question for feedback. It was basically, how do we get past this idea that men only want sex? And before I get to that, I want to address some, straw manning that maybe it's, even though straw manning is a fallacy, trying to figure out what happened behind the straw man, because I don't think all straw mans are deliberate. Like, cognitive biases exists for various reasons, and often they're protective. It's very hard to become an effective critical thinker. But there was an interesting breakdown in communication that resulted in a straw manning of my position of the form that I was blaming weak men or beta men for platforming the bad feminists and not the good la 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 la. The idea that I was blaming weak men, because I referenced that these guys were socially awkward and therefore had a particular view of women accordingly. Someone being socially awkward doesn't mean they're weak, doesn't mean they lack power. They might not be good at wielding that power. But the problem is they actually have a fair bit of power. And they're not very good at wielding it. And that's the problem. Now, if you want to call that weakness, that's your bag. But I didn't say weak. I personally think these guys have way too much power. But I think it was interesting that people heard some reference to weakness when nothing was said of the sort. Just because somebody is not socially adept does not mean they are weak-willed. Just because someone is not a good verbal communicator does not mean they are weak-willed. But this fear of being perceived as weak just came through. And I do think there is, and I don't mean this as negative. This is me attempting to empathize here. This almost resentment for the fact that women are perceived to be allowed weakness that men are not, is driving some of the hostility in this discussion. And I think that, while I understand the perspective, I want to give the other side. It's not that women are allowed to be weak. It's that women are assumed to be weak. And so we are denied certain opportunities accordingly, because the assumption is, oh, we just can't handle it because this is hard and a woman will just fall apart. Sadly, that is still far too common an opinion. And I maintain that it is because a lot of these guys in positions of power in gaming are constantly overwhelmed, constantly afraid for their jobs. And they think, if I can't handle this, a woman isn't going to have a chance, right? My sarcastic over dramatization there is just my frustration. I'm acknowledging it. So, right. It's a problem. And like I said, there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotion right now. And this makes this stuff hard. I'm referencing this particular recurring feedback just to point out, I never said anything about weakness. It's telling that people read that in. So let's move on to the people who actually answered the question I asked, which is, Um, um, I'll have to skip a comment. Sorry, there are just too many. I'm going to run out of time. So getting to the question, how we can get past the idea that, you know, male interest in women is split into a binary, either interest in a person sexually or interest in a person for non-sexual reason. Lodestar81 says, in my opinion, the best way to combat that idea is to point to female creators who are willing to embrace the sexual attention, but who want to engage with their audience beyond that reason. Right now in the Twitch gaming sphere, I think some of the best creators are the women who joined together to create the Vishojo agency and the Silver Veil specifically. Silver markets all of her content as a blend of wholesome and lewd. She uses a virtual avatar that wears very revealing clothing, talks about the characters in video games she finds attractive, and regularly publishes videos of her avatar dancing. She also talks about how much she loves her mom, about how female creators inspired her to become a streamer, and celebrates all the achievements of her fellow creators at the Vishojo agency. She had no problem with any of her viewers stopping by because they find her avatar hot or think her voice is sexy, but she constantly engages directly with the community in a way that shows she wants to create more than just that, whether it be storytelling or memes or a cozy atmosphere. Ultimately, I believe that sex positivity and destigmatization of sexuality are the best cure to the binary appeal mindset because it allows for recognition of the whole person's sexuality included. And I think you saw me smiling while I was reading that comment because I just like, this sounds like a very cool channel. I wasn't aware of it, but this sounds very cool. I know that you know, what do you call them? Like virtual avatars. I forgot they're called virtual vloggers or whatever. It's controversial in some circles. I think they're cool. There's going to be resistance for them for a while because of the sexual content, but I agree. I think we need the, you know, hot anime avatar contingent. I think there also has to be women who don't use sexualized avatars. We need both. I think that no matter when one is totally dominant or the other totally dominant, neither of that are good. Because, you know, there are plenty of guys who don't milk conventional sex appeal, and then guys who are constantly with their shirt off. Like, men can do both and women can't right now. And whether that's because people find female sexual empowerment scary or people want to demonize the male sex urge or some combination of both, it is sex negative and it's not right. So thanks for your comment. Moving on to Richard Hartslab. For the end question, self-assured characters. Bayonetta is loved because of this quality. I've seen classic Lara Croft described this way. Chrono Trigger's Isla and Frog both have this quality. Metroid Other M is derided chiefly because it was the game that took self-assurance away from Samus. There's nothing wrong with a coming-of-age story where a main character grows into self-assurance. Final Fantasy VI Terra comes to my mind if it feels well-earned. The problem is a lot of Hollywood doesn't seem to know what self-assurance looks like anymore. They're just creating angry and mean characters who impose their will on others and call it self-assurance or empowerment or whatnot. This tends to show in how it rubs audiences the wrong way. My thoughts are probably a little scattered here though, because I gotta run to work in just a couple of minutes and needed to belt this out on my phone. So it probably won't read all that well. Okay, Richard Hartslab, it read well enough for me to feature it in Feedback Friday. So don't worry. I do agree that self-assurance is an attractive quality that we are sort of losing overall, not just in female characters. I mean, there's so much self-doubting in male characters. Now, you know, a little bit crisis of confidence and everything like that are fine as part of an arc, but it's starting to seem less like a well-crafted story and more like therapy for the creators. All right, moving on. Lots of comments to get to. Corvander Emberstone says, I want consistency in the worlds I play. Sex sells, this is extremely true, but I'm more interested in worlds that have a consistent theme and feel. I'm all for MK9 thongs, I love sexy things, but that means we need men wearing this stuff as well, which is fine. Fantasy is fun. Things can get wild. If you're going to sell me on your fantasy, then I want a consistent theme. The people in this world are fantastical, there's magic, there's mystery, the fashions of this world are that people just don't wear much. It seems and sounds silly, but it's essential potential for my brain, and it's easier to sell me things if the world follows its established laws. In the past, games were very skewed towards sexy women and hulked out armored clothed men. All I need is a shift towards world building, and I can support whatever is thrown at me. I agree. I call that the He-Man and She-Ra test. You know, Conan the Barbarian is wearing something that doesn't look terribly naked next to Red Sonja. All good. He-Man doesn't look naked next to She-Ra. Well, he looks more naked. All good. If it's just a world where people don't wear a lot of clothes, all good. And to me, that's what Mortal Kombat, the Edenian realm was for me in Mortal Kombat. Those people just weren't very body conscious, unlike here. So fine. Those people dress that way. But I agree. It's gotta be men and the women. The problem, we get into a problem when guys are all super covered up and women aren't. Like, it's just, I will say, I thought that the Mortal Kombat costumes around Mortal Kombat 9 were getting so naked that they were having trouble making the costumes truly interesting. You need a certain amount of fabric to create an interesting costume. And I found the Mortal Kombat 9 costumes just got a little boring for my taste because there just wasn't enough to work with, right? The costume was the skin. But that's my critique of it, not the morality of it, right? I just found the costumes a little bit more to them, more interesting. As long as it's not ridiculous where the women are wearing like boned bustiers and peplums and kitten heels fighting in sand. That just insults my intelligence in Mortal Kombat. So I totally agree with you, Coriander, that it just, like, consistency, please. Like, just whatever you're doing in your world, have it make sense. Like, it doesn't have to make real world sense. It has to make consistent sense in that fantasy world, right? All right, cool. We're in agreement. Moving on to a new commenter, Soar. You popped up on my recommendation feed today. By the way, sorry, I forgot to say before, these comments are, I skipped one. Oops. These comments are edited for space because I wanted to get more in. Leon Belmont is the next one I want to go to. Hi, Leanna. I think the only way anyone gets past stereotypes is to see the issue for what it truly is. Like when an illusion spell in D&D Masks was really there, but individuals have to be open to listening to learn, not just to respond. Bless, agreed. The problem, I think, is not one problem, it's many. The stereotype men only think about sex is pushed and reinforced in some media, usually stuff aimed at women created by those who already hold the view. If men deviate from what media creators have decided is sexy, bracket, I think Shiva from Mortal Kombat is hot, don't judge. They are told they are fetishizing a woman. I'm just going to pause there. Shiva's sexy as hell, man. Like, why would I judge? Shiva's hot. As you have discussed before, Leanna, the male sex urge in certain feminist thought is seen as bad and is demonized. Please correct if wrong here. You're not wrong. We are combating, spelled it with a K, a series of prevailing stereotypes and belief like it's a survival mode. No matter how many rounds you get through, eventually you lose. Men just saying here is the reality of our perception and experience is what might do it. But I am not sure the people we would want to hear that honest message would listen. Boogie2988 once said, I forget where, changing hearts and minds takes time. If people like you do what you do and others spread those messages, maybe over time attitudes will change. Thank you for your hard work and taking those gut punches when I'm too scared to try fighting back against those messages. Beelzebub bless and good day. Beelzebub bless. I love that. See, there's an example of like, why would somebody have to say, don't judge, I find Shiva sexy? I think Shiva was designed to be sexy. And, there's an example of every sexy woman in Mortal Kombat, every sexy woman in Soul Calibur doesn't look the same, right? And that's good. That's what we want, not to take all the sexy out. There are different kinds of sexy, Now to Soar. New commenter who I accidentally skipped the previous comment. You popped up in my recommendation feed today. Well, obviously there are more things a straight male might think about playing with a female character on screen than sex. I also think one also has to talk about how situations which fit the stereotype are being portrayed. When in, let's say, an RPG, I'm busy fighting, solving some puzzle, trying to decide the right dialogue option that might fit the character, etc. I personally am way too busy thinking about that to get distracted by a female character's sex appeal. Like most of the time when playing a video game, one is doing something, which I would need to stop to elaborately think about sex with whatever character. I wouldn't get to play the game if the stereotype was true. I personally think regarding any form of trying to alter games to make people think and act in a specific way to force a personal moral view is a very short-term solution to reach the goal the developer might have there, regardless of whether I agree with it or not. I just love the way that was put. That was an edited down comment. But I just thought it was so like, right, like, pfft, if the stereotype was true, I couldn't play these games. Mic drop. Right? Thank you, new commenter, Sor. Let's move on. This one I'm ending on because it is so cerebral and it is written clearly to be read in the written word. So I apologize if I bungle the verbal reading of it. It is quite complex language. But I was reading this going, okay, someone gets it. And they're using a very different vocabulary than I am, but someone gets it. So, I am mentat. Fallout reference, cool. A few thoughts. The grossly oversimplified idea that the reason the borderline schizoid discussions happen in media is because a self-cornered selection of terrified gatekeeping pseudo-nerds only lets certain people they already know the programming of into their club is both pitiful and entirely believable through the observed behavior. Couldn't agree more. People often drag perfectly workable, improvable situations into the abyss and chaos through sheer bloody-minded determination to not let go of the one thing they managed to get a solid grip on. I can see how this would apply to partnered but formerly small niche media outlets for a hobby that's turned from a plaything of the specialist into a phenomenon no one can truly fathom due to the scope, scale, volume, and absurd amount of money involved. I told you this was a cerebral comment. The secondary gaze theory mentioned links in well. That was me talking about the other version of gaze theory where I said, an object observed, as this commenter says. So the secondary gaze theory mention links in well to the object observed aspect of scientific research. Even the most circumspect instruments can cause odd results if applied in the middle of a reaction process. Imagine what a focused spotlight would do when any action is likely to result in a random vegetable being lobbed at your head. I find myself in general agreement with others in the comments. It's not that the male competitive / aspirational drive is a thing to be circumvented in professional circles. It's that there needs to be a moderating force to forestall friction and bracket, typically idiotic, close bracket, misunderstandings. To be honest, this is a much wider issue now than it used to be. You stick any two groups of largely unattached people, bracket, or even a single group of specialists typically starved for attention, close bracket, together, and drama will typically occur. The traditional response is to have a structure in place where there are examples of normalized cooperative relationships in the open, and serving as a guide is simply bonking anyone that gets horny tends to run you out of sticks rather than people to bonk. I love that. Simply bonking anyone that gets horny tends to run you out of sticks rather than people to bonk. Bracket, creating a bunch of telltale self-entitled prefect finger wagglers in the process. An excess of wieldable powers combined with active incentives to not behave in traditionally group beneficial manners can pull out the worst in people, especially when for every seat at the table there will be a bunch of people willing to do a lot to get even a taste of the feast. The example of NASA is a great one because that was very much an aspirational and goal-oriented organization. What mattered was in what you could do from within a field of fairly technically minded specialists. And that comment was cut down as well. But wow, that was some smarty pants smart stuff right there. But within the smarty pants smart stuff, the fact that just bonking anyone that tends to get horny tends to run you out of sticks rather than people to bonk was just so apt because it's a human urge, right? You get a lot of twisted stuff when you, and Labeling things natural or normal is charged, I recognize, because often the idea of normalcy is too often used an excuse, or it is too narrow and restricts behavior that is perfectly healthy but not mainstream, for lack of a better term. But yeah, it doesn't benefit us at all to try to deny that people have a sex urge, or that a sex urge itself is treated as just inherently bad, as opposed to, predatory or violent, or things that are too domineering, or, lacking in consent, so on and so forth. I, you know, there seems to be a thread through the comments that basically we need things that give a nod to sexuality that are okay, because nothing being okay is not healthy, it's not practical, and it's ultimately just gonna fail. Like, you go back as far as humans have existed, back to the art of antiquity, there's sexualized imagery. You're not going to get rid of it. Now, I am going to stay away from things like the Lola Bunny debate, because I just can't. I have my limits. There's been too much crazy this week, and it's not a video game. I get that it's a depiction of women that has been kind of nerfed from its 90s depiction. But I have to pick my battles. I admit I have been having a lot of trouble with the insane amount of fighting over Potato Heads, Dr. Seuss, Space Jam characters, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying it's right. It's an old pinball reference, but somewhere between the screaming over Dr. Seuss and the Lola Bunny thing, I just went tilt. Like, GameStop, you tilted the table, imbalance, can't. I just had a shutdown. There is only so much freaking out a person can take. I agree with the commenter who said this is going to be a slow and steady thing. I want to let you guys know something, and this is not just about me. This is about any creator you feel offers a moderate view. We need active support. Financial's great, but I'm sure a great many of you also have talents and skills that could be. Some wonderful person did the captioning for me that I couldn't get done because YouTube barfed on me for Boss Fight episode 3. I just got it this week. I was super grateful. And this person was like, please don't credit me. That's too much attention. And I'm sorry it took so long. And I'm like, oh my God, like, bless you. Thank you for doing it, because it's one less thing I have to do. Right? In order to play the long game, we need to be able to keep going. And you guys have a big part to play in that. And part of what I just found so, oh my God, fuck it all, over all this screaming over culture war stuff, is that these are all very powerful brands with, people, children's authors don't make that much money. Dr. Seuss has an entire island at Universal Studios Islands of Adventure. Okay? That's a very wealthy enterprise, Dr. Seuss Enterprises. Same with Hasbro. Same with Warner Brothers as a company. There are creators out there, artists and commenters and writers that are barely making ends meet, if they are making ends meet at all. If people took 1/10 of the attention, people were trying to buy those Dr. Seuss books on eBay for $400 a pop. Do you know what an independent creator could do with $400? And I'm not saying you guys are. Like, you probably aren't, but people linked me to it. And we do need to play the long game. I agree with this. You gotta support creators, right? I'm sure that virtual blogger, the shoujo one, does quite fine, but maybe not. I don't know. I don't know how the size of the channel, but like people like that, get a commission from an artist you follow on Twitter. Overcome your moral purity regarding online payment options and work it out with a creator. Like, if you don't like Patreon, for instance, set up a monthly PayPal thing. If you don't like PayPal, figure something out. Stop making excuses for not supporting smaller creators. Because people who already have millions of dollars, even if they get so-called canceled, they've got investments in other things. They have friends in high places. They are more likely to do well than some poor independent game developer that's getting drowned out in all the noise because the so-called gaming websites that are supposed to help independent creators don't, because they're so busy chasing clicks. They'll write a bazillion Hogwarts Legacy stories before they'll cover a single indie game because traffic. They have no feeling of responsibility, of a mandate to support local creators. They have not put the time and energy into figuring out how to do an indie spotlight, how to make that stuff work. Hire a charismatic, interesting, likable host to do a weekly indie spotlight, and they're entertaining, so people will tune in. Have it be a cosplayer or something like that. So that's the thing. Like, if people weren't so afraid of sexy, you could actually draw people in with some cute girls or cute boys, or both, the cute trans people, everybody in between, gender non-binary people, and show indie games. Because right now we got nothing. And the average number of sales for an indie game on Steam is dropping year to year. This model is killing the innovation of the industry. All it does is generate clicks for the websites. AAA can't stand them because it's all negative coverage. And indie gets nothing from them. So I can't call that a healthy ecosystem. That's a parasitic relationship between the press and the people who actually make the content you love, right? Like, trust me, I do crowdfunding campaigns and I do, consulting and stuff like that. And the number one thing that people ignore me on to their detriment is I tell them right off the bat, do not rely on press. You are unlikely to get press. The press is too fickle. Build community, focus your attention on community. And instead of building up that mailing list before they drop their Kickstarter, they start meticulously writing press releases and changing one word there and changing one word there and doing 12 drafts on something that nobody in the games press pays attention to because it's not going to get them any clicks. Number one thing that people I consult on crowdfunding for ignore at their own peril. I'm right every single damn time. The only time that any sort of press comes out of an indie game is when somebody can take a pot shot at a developer or somebody acts victimized. It's a terrible, shitty, counterproductive model. and we can overcome it, at least on a small scale. Nobody's going to get rich, but you can keep a creator going. So, they can pay their rent and internet and their cell phone and have some left over for food, right? That's all these creators need because they do legitimately love what they do. They just need enough money to live on. So that's my plea going into the weekend. We are coming up on crowdfunding season. Like March through May is peak crowdfunding season, and it's going to be a rough year for a lot of people because of COVID. So keep your eye out for projects that you can support, because it's that little bit of money means a lot more to those indie devs than the same amount of money means to a multi-million-dollar franchise, right? That's just truth. Okay, everybody, have a great weekend. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.